So today I wanted to have a quick walk through the Shakespeare section of the English Literature Component 1 exam for GCSE. And by now you should be aware, obviously, that Component 1 is a 2-hour exam. So the Shakespeare section will take 1 hour of that. Okay, there are two questions, one extract based that's worth 15 marks, and the other on a key theme, character, or relationship that is worth 25 marks. Now, as a result of those mark allocations, you are advised by the exam board to spend 20 minutes on the extract question and 40 minutes on the larger essay question. Now, remember, in the essay question, that's where you need to use your wider knowledge of quotations and events within the play. You are not confined to a single extract. Obviously, if you've got extra time, you have to take that into account as well. So, this slide contains all of the previous questions on Romeo and Juliet that have come up in recent years. Where you see A, you'll see that I've tried to sort of abbreviate the extracts that's been used, and looking at section B for the essay questions, you can see that there are examples of years where they have used a character such as Romeo, Tybalt, Mercutio, Juliet, and they've also used key themes as well, such as conflict, such as love. In 2021 and 2020, they threw somewhat of a left field type of question at us, where it says, write about one or two of the relationships within the Capulet family. Now, this is a type of question where you can bring in multiple characters. You can even bring in the nurse, for example, into that. She's a member of the Capulet household. And in 2020, it gave the question of what male character, for which of the male characters in Romeo and Juliet do you have the most sympathy? So again, another question in which you can bring in multiple characters. So the friar might be included in a question like that, for example. So I hope you can see through looking at this vast array and range of questions that it's a very dangerous game for anybody to try and predict what's going to come up. A lot of you at this time of year are always asking teachers, what do you think is going to come up? Have you got any predictions or whatever? But look at the range of questions on this slide. So it's very difficult to sort of make any bold assertions in that regard. I suppose two clear things that haven't come up yet are the friar and explicitly the theme of fate. But again, I wouldn't like to make any bold predictions in that area. Prepare for the unexpected, and if you're comfortable with any of these questions that are on the slide right now, you will be fine. One thing I can say about the extract question is that you will almost always be given a very significant extract, an extract that has a deep significance to the plot and the trajectory of the play. It will be one of relevance. They've picked it for a reason. And that's really where I want to start. I would like to start by looking and thinking about this extract question. Now, the extract question could be a soliloquy, which is a sort of monologue in which a character expresses their innermost thoughts directly to the audience, not to the other characters on stage. So it can either be a soliloquy or monologue, aka one character speaking, or it can contain multiple characters. Now, I would advise you for the first 3 or 4 minutes, maybe very, very briefly is what I'm trying to say, to annotate the extract for key pieces of evidence that you would want to include in your answer. This will make it easier for you to pinpoint key relevant sections and to extract the evidence from it. Read the extract in full first, not just the first bit and work your way through it, but read it in full. So just to give you some examples of how these questions are phrased, so this is the question about the shared sonnet that's come up, and some of you may have done this before. So this says, look at how Romeo and Juliet speak and behave here. Likewise, in the fight scene, where there are multiple characters within the scene, it says, look at how the characters speak and behave here. So there seems to be a recurring theme in the style of the questions when there are more than one character within the extract. When there is just one character within the extract, such as Juliet's soliloquy before she takes the potion. It says, what does the extract show an audience about Juliet's thoughts and feelings? Now, roughly speaking, whether you get a character, a sole character extract, or one with multiple characters in it, it is essentially asking you how are they presented within the extract. Okay, speak and behave, how are they presented? Their thoughts and feelings, how are their thoughts and feelings, their mindset presented within the extract? So just look out for these sort of recurring themes in the way that the questions are phrased. It may be different this time around, but essentially what they're looking for is how is a character or multiple characters, how are they presented within the extract? So just some sort of overall warnings, really. I've screenshotted this from the 2023 examiner report that they always produce at the end of every exam cycle. And this bit that's highlighted is really, really important. Now, as I mentioned, this in 2023, the extract question was on Juliet's death, the happy dagger scene. She speaks to the friar first, he flees away, and then she resorts to killing herself. But what is relevant here is this bit that's highlighted. It says quite clearly that many students wasted time discussing how events led up to this point, but there were some, and many, the successful ones, were able to track through the extract from the friar's initial shock to basically of finding the bodies through to Juliet's suicide. So what it's warning you against here is wasting exam time explaining everything that's built up towards this extract. In both the extract question and the essay-based question, you do not need to just tell the story. The examiner knows the story. What you need to do is analyse. And this question in particular, the extract question, is there explicitly for expressing your knowledge and understanding of the scene, but analysing the language and the imagery and the techniques that Shakespeare uses to get his points across. Okay, so do not waste time building up to what happened before the extract. This is only a 20-minute question and we do not have time for that. So this, again, I've lifted from the examiner's report, and it kind of pinpoints some clear pros and cons of good responses to bad responses. So what it's wanting here, and this is of particular relevance, is short, emphasis on short, and apt. That means relevant references to support the points made. You do not need to waste time, like I said, building up to what happened before the extract, and you do not need to waste time quoting lengthy passages of text. All that happens when you do that is that you kid yourself into working, that you're working really hard because you're writing a lot, but what's really happening is that you're wasting time. Short embedded quotes are the way forward. Now, it also stresses covering a wider range of evidence as possible. Okay, you need to sort of briefly summarize the significance of the extract, and then dive straight into the evidence. So try to get some bits, as it says here, from the beginning, middle, and end, but not going beyond it. You don't need to go beyond it. Try and get that beginning, middle, and end to show that you have read the extract in full, that you understand the extract in full, and that you are covering that maximum range of evidence. And obviously here it says focus on how language and imagery is used to convey meaning. So not just picking relevant quotations, but explaining the relevance of them and explaining the effect on the audience. One thing that is a sort of recurring theme in these questions is this, okay? It says here to warn against, it urges for less reference to contextual factors when AO3, that's context, is not addressed in this question. Now, you can make a passing comment about contextual factors, such as the patriarchal society of the time. However, you are not explicitly assessed on context, so do not waste your time writing in detail and in depth about it. You will not get marks for it. It is clear and simple. Save that for the poetry section. So just to be aware, okay, like it says here, you need to have practice in being sort of familiar with responding to extracts that might just have one person or with multiple characters in as well. So my final points really in approaching the extract is to make sure that you stick to your timings. It's a short question, 20 minutes. Try and pick up as maximum range of evidence as well, and I do really like it. I've mentioned this in my lessons. I really do like it when a student briefly summarises the significance of an extract at the start to cement and to show that knowledge and understanding of what's going on. This will get you AO1 marks from the start, even if it's a couple of sentences. And if you are one of those people that really struggle with putting pen to paper and getting going with your answers, use the sentence, "This extract is significant because," and then explain the significance and dive into your evidence. Or use the sentence, "Within these lines we see," or "Within these lines we learn of." Okay, so use those sentence stems to get going and then dive into your evidence after the summary. We do not need a large summary. Briefly is bolded for a reason, but you need to show that understanding from the start. The exam reports stress the idea of tracking through the extract, so sort of maybe going through it chronologically and showing your understanding of it, of the developments within it, and try to comment, as it says, on events in the beginning, middle and end to show that you've read the full extract, you understand the full extract, and to cover a wider range of evidence as possible. The difficulty of this task is you picking up what bits that you think are relevant. That's why it's really important to read it in full first, maybe underline, circle key bits of evidence, and use them as your sort of skeleton for your response. So use short, embedded quotations where possible to support your points. Look for patterns in language, imagery, semantic fields, for example. When we did the shared sonnet question, there's lots and lots of religious imagery within that extract and extended metaphors. There could be shifts in tone or points of tension, such as the fight scene. When Romeo eventually arrives, that creates a sense of tension because that's who Tybalt is looking for. So if there are any extracts with character entries, that might be of significance as well, and something worth mentioning in your response. This is so important. Please only use evidence from the extract. You will not be rewarded from evidence from elsewhere. You can signpost very briefly other bits in the play, but you do not need to quote from the wider play. That is question B, not question A. The reason that they've done this extract question is for close language analysis of the extract. So unless you get the prologue, I do not want to hear any references to star-crossed lovers or anything like that. You will not be rewarded for it. Save that stuff for question B. So use evidence from the extract, not beyond it, not before it. And do not, as it said, waste time building up to the extract. Summarise and then get straight into your evidence. So moving on to the lengthier essay question. Now this could be on a character. As we've seen, it could also be on like a relationship of some kind, and it could also be on a wider, broad theme. And again, this term tracking comes up. Okay, they want you to think about how a particular theme is initiated, how it is started, and how it develops throughout the play. Now, with thematic questions, and questions particularly on Romeo and Juliet in particular, the prologue is always a really good base from which to build a thematic answer. Quite simply because it contains all the key themes. Love, fate, conflict / death are all intermingled in that prologue. So it provides a really good base from which to build on. If you have any sort of last minute revision, looking again at that prologue would be really, really important, and extracting the key quotations from it. So again, it stresses the idea of picking a range of apt events. You're probably looking at minimum 4, possibly 5 key events, key moments that might shape a particular theme or character. Okay, track that development. If you think about Love, for example, within the play, it comes in many different forms. There's a sort of sexual view of love. There's a very transactional view of love that comes from Lady Capulet. And then there's obviously the familial view of love and the overly romanticised view of love between Romeo and Juliet. Likewise with conflict. There's familial conflict. There's internal conflict in the mind. So do highlight important turning points and contrasts that might happen within the play. There are turning points within the play. The fight scene in Act 3, Scene 1 acts as the peripeteia within the play. From that moment, Romeo becomes a wanted man and a killer, and that scene ultimately means that we know that their sort of happily ever after story will not come to fruition. And be careful here, as it says, on spag. Okay, 20 marks of this question is up for content and organisation. The other 5 marks is available for spag. So again, tracking a character, relationship or theme across the play is really important. Selecting detailed textual analysis, so picking good quotations. And it mentions here proofreading. Now, I can forgive anyone for struggling with their spelling, but things like capital letters at the start of names is unforgivable, and you will be punished for these types of things. I know not loads of marks are up for grabs, but this is the question to make sure that your spag is polished in. So moving on to some key quotations. Now I've tried to pick some obvious ones and some less obvious ones, and the reason why I've picked some of these is because they sort of cover multiple techniques, language techniques, and also multiple themes. So we've got the very famous "O brawling love and O loving hate" from Romeo at the start of the play. Now this is a great quote because it's an oxymoron. We've got that idea of brawling love after his rejection, his melancholic state after his rejection by Rosaline. We've got the oxymoron being used here. It is obviously a quote about love, but it also is a reference to Romeo's internal conflict. It is almost an early hint that love will be very much a destructive force within the play. This quote here, bright angel, okay, and now very often people turn to the quote that Juliet is the sun as their sort of religious imagery quote, light imagery quote. But I do quite like bright angel. Now he calls her this when he sees her on the balcony, but she cannot see him. And the reason I like this quote is because it's a 2-in-1. It's got light imagery and it's got religious imagery, and obviously it is there to depict Juliet's radiant beauty and her kind of perceived purity. Almost like the love is a religious experience, and obviously it links to the theme of love. Now I've included one from the nurse here as well. The nurse also says that women grow by men. Now this quotation, "seek happy nights to happy days," is a sign of the nurse as a source of comic relief. She's quite a comedic character up until the end of the play, that is. So this is an example of her bawdy sexual humour, and it's a view of sexual love that we see within the play. She's essentially saying that if you have a happy night with someone, many happy days might follow. Now, obviously, the nurse is a character that's really ripe for exploration. She acts as Juliet's confidant and a maternal figure to her. But this is a good quote to show her sort of comedic side. Now, also, this quotation from the friar, "wisely and slow, those stumble that run fast," is a quotation that covers many different literary techniques and also covers many of the key themes within the play. It is, of course, a metaphor. This is from when we are first introduced to him, and he talks with Romeo. Romeo asks him to marry Juliet, and he warns him that he needs to be wise and slow, and warns him about acting with haste. So this is a metaphor in general. It also foreshadows, quite ironically, the speed and almost violent nature, to quote the friar again, in which their relationship develops. And like I said to you already, it's clearly linked to the theme of fate and the idea of haste, quickness that runs throughout this very short play. Also, the friar, okay, going to this quote, these violent delights have violent ends. This is a metaphor. There is also that oxymoronic phrase, violent delights. And again, this acts as a warning to Romeo. He is warning him that if he rushes into a violent, quick, passionate delight of love, it will have a violent end. So that oxymoron of violent delights is quite an interesting one to explore. It also foreshadows their violent end at the end of the play. As a result, it is quite ironic. And again, it straddles these two themes of love and fate. Now, what's also important to the wider question about the friar is, actually, is he also guilty of moving fast and ultimately stumbling in the process of it? Are some of these words quite hypocritical from the friar? This quote from Mercutio, a plague on both your houses, is always a good one to use. It is a metaphorical plague. It foreshadows again the death of Romeo and Juliet. At this stage in the play, when he is about to die, he is essentially cursing both households. And there is a bitter irony to this, that this curse is eventually carried out. So that's why it is a quote that can also link to, obviously, the idea of foreshadowing and the theme of fate. And very often, thinking of fate, we often turn to that quotation from Romeo, I defy you stars, and that is a very good one. But I prefer, personally, if you're going to remember one, I am fortune's fool. And that's because we've got that additional language technique in there of alliteration. Now, fricative alliteration, to be precise. If we think about the alliteration here, fortune's fool, that technique brings those two words together more closely. Okay, he is a fool of fortune. It makes those words fortune, meaning fate, and fool be more inextricably linked, just like they are throughout the entire play. And obviously it links to the ideas of fate and a sense of what we would call internal conflict within Romeo. Not physical conflict, but internal conflict. Now, linked again to Romeo and the idea of fate is this quote here. Now, I said previously that you ought to be focusing on really short quotations, which is obviously really important. But if you can remember anything from this quote, it is a really good one to dig at, because there is a lot to unpick. Now, this is said right before he ends his life, and he says that he wants to shake the yoke of inauspicious stars from this world-wearied flesh. Now, this is interesting. A yoke is like a harness that used to be attached like between horses and carts. And inauspicious, essentially in this sense, means kind of cursed, unlucky. So what he's saying here before his death is that he wants to rid himself, he wants to shake off his cursed fate. And the only way he can do this is through his own demise, his own death. And what's significant here is that we have this line about him describing himself as world-wearied. Again, this alliteration drawing those two words together. At this point in the play, Romeo is very much resigned to death. So it is fitting there that he describes himself as being world-wearied. I thought I would also throw in this quotation, we still have known thee for a holy man. Now, not loads going on here in terms of language techniques. Obviously, it uses religious language because he's talking about the friar. At the end of the play, the friar basically tries to defend himself. Okay, he says that a greater power has thwarted what he's trying to achieve, basically blaming fate rather than himself for what has happened. And Prince Aeschylus actually excuses him. He says, no, look, we still think that you're a holy man. You haven't committed any sins. So this somewhat links to the idea of fate, but it's more of a relevant point about the friar in general, the fact that he doesn't follow his words of advice that he gives to Romeo. He marries them in haste. Perhaps he has good intentions of uniting the families and turning their rancour to pure love, as he says. But ultimately, he is excused. He's let off the hook. and this is really important. He doesn't really get any repercussions for his very rash and impulsive actions. Just in addition to this, that previous quote about the inauspicious stars, that obviously is linked to Romeo's death. Romeo's final words are also very important, and I could have easily added that onto this slide here. Romeo's final words is thus with a kiss I die. And this is when he kisses Juliet before he dies from the potion. Now this is quite interesting, because thus with a kiss I die basically encapsulates the whole play. The idea of love and death being intertwined, and Romeo's final act of love is ultimately a final act of death. So that's a really good quotation that blends these two themes of love, conflict and hate. And that's the way to think about this play. All of those themes are intermingled and intertwined, and that's what makes it quite a complex play. Love, which we ostensibly think as something really positive, is actually portrayed as quite a destructive force within the play. So I thought I'd go through some quotations. Obviously you will have a range of your own, but I like some of these because A, they pick up on multiple literary techniques such as foreshadowing, dramatic irony, imagery, etc., alliteration. But they also cover a wide range of themes which are always useful for the essay questions. So just some final points then before we wrap up. Just remember to stick to your timings, okay? 20 minutes on the extract, 40 minutes on the larger essay question. Remember that use of short embedded evidence, frequent, okay? It needs to be peppered into your answers throughout to show that you have interacted with the text. There is absolutely no excuse for not using a range of evidence within the extract question, because it's slap bang in front of you. Okay, so just try and remember some of those key quotes that cover a lot of themes and a lot of techniques, and you'll be good. So remember, like I said, key literary terminology. Do not neglect what's in front of you, and I mean that to those of you who are really wanting to achieve the top grades. As you all should be aiming for, but very often students who think that they are doing a very precise and nuanced language analysis sometimes forget the wood through the trees and forget a simile that's staring them in the face, or a metaphor that's staring them in the face. Do not do that. Remember to stick back to the basics. If you do the basics consistently and with accuracy, you will achieve a high grade. Alongside the literary terminology, by the way, also needs to be the effects. Okay, there's no point identifying light imagery, for example, and not being able to explain that it's there to convey Juliet's radiant beauty. There's no point being able to identify dramatic irony without explaining how it's used to escalate the tension at particular moments. If you get a character question or a thematic question, not a thematic question in this regard, but if you get a character question in particular, you need to think about their role and function within the wider play. So I've mentioned this before. If you've got the nurse or the friar, they act as confidants. The nurse is very much a maternal figure to Juliet. Tybalt is the antagonist of the play. Think about where these characters fit. What is their wider role and function within the play? Look for a maximum range of coverage, okay, within the extract. We've mentioned this before. Aim for that beginning, middle and end to show that you've read it all and to show that the examiner that you've encompassed it all. And look, and that key word again, look to track the development of a character, theme or relationship in the essay question. Think about how it develops over time. Think about how it develops throughout the entire play. And this is also applicable to your other questions on component 2. It's applicable to an Inspector Calls. It's applicable to A Christmas Carol. Character development. And like I've said before, please avoid contextual references. You can make passing comments to patriarchal society, etc., gender inequality. That's fine. We do not need an extended response at all. You are just throwing marks away. It is not explicitly assessed. Save that for the poetry side of the paper. And a really simple one, but one that's often neglected, Romeo and Juliet is a play. It is not a novella. It is not a novel. It is not a poem that some of you referenced in some cases during the mocks. And plays have audiences. Okay, so a simple one, but just remember to get the play and the audience in there. Okay, and lastly, of course, good luck. You've worked hard for this. Look back to that, to those key quotations. Remember your characters. Remember your themes. Go out there. Stay calm. Pick up evidence, state the effects, and be precise. Okay, it's all about stamina and just keeping sustained, maintained points throughout. Think about your range of inferences. Think about your key quotations and the effects on the audience, and you will be fine.